Authoritarian regimes, dystopian futures, book burning, subtly erotic firemen, hedonistic societies, nihilism, and the meaning of life, all wrapped up into one book, Fahrenheit 451. It's hard to beat that. On the surface, Fahrenheit 451 is about authoritarian regimes and censorship. Fahrenheit 451 came out within a decade of World War II ending and during the Cold War. And book burnings are famously something that the Nazis did. So given all of this, I think it's really easy to read Fahrenheit 451 as a kind of response to the historical moment that birthed it. I don't think that's wrong, and I think that there's plenty of evidence that would support that reading of the story, but I also think it's kind of boring. When it comes to stories, I'm much more interested in what they have to say about human nature, or like the big human questions, rather than a response or a critique to specific historical events. Luckily, this book has a lot more to offer than just a simple critique of big government or censorship. So there's a couple of reasons that I don't think this book is primarily about like big government or authoritarian regimes or whatever, other than the fact that like Bradbury himself said so. First off, the main government figure or like the antagonists of the story are firemen. I don't know about you, but when I think about big government, literally the last possible thing I think of is probably the fire department. Secondly, it explicitly states in the novel that the censorship was not due to a government mandate. It didn't come from the government down. There's no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of the essay. In order to understand what this book says about some of the existential questions that it poses, we have to first understand the world that is established within the first half of the book. Put simply, the world of Fahrenheit 451 is a hedonistic paradise. This is established from the very beginning of the book with what is one of my favorite opening lines. It was a pleasure to burn. This statement honestly captures the world of the novel perfectly. Think about the word pleasure. We have an entire spectrum of words that describe positive feelings, and all of these words are different in very nuanced ways. Pleasure normally refers to like the surface level positive sensations that we feel. But there's like a certain level of depth that distinguishes pleasure from like fulfillment and joy that pleasure lacks. This is doubly reinforced when we look at like the metaphorical meaning of burning in the story. Burning's real beauty is that it destroys responsibility and consequences. A problem gets too burdensome, then into the furnace with it. We have a society that is characterized by the pleasure that they feel from having no responsibilities and no consequences. They spend their days talking to electronic walls or driving fast cars. Captain B, the main antagonist of the story, reinforces this multiple times. What do we want in this country above all? People want to be happy. Isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say. Well, aren't they? Don't we keep them moving? Don't we give them fun? That's all we live for, isn't it? For pleasure, for titillation. And you must admit, our culture provides plenty of these. The entire society has been constructed so that everyone living in the society can maximize pleasure. On the surface, at least, I don't think it sounds outrightly horrible that they've constructed a society that kind of maximizes pleasure. Like, who doesn't like pleasure? And this takes us to our next part. Like, what does it feel like to live in a society that is constructed to maximize pleasure at the cost of responsibility? This is mainly explored from Guy's interactions with society as he grows from someone who was once a willing participant in the society to someone who's taking a step back and really reconsidering his place in the world. The biggest impetus for this change is a girl that he meets named Clarice. Clarice basically bombards him with questions that he's never really asked himself, and she makes judgments about society that he's never really thought about before. And it starts to make him see things in a different light. But I don't think it's social to get a bunch of people together and then not let them talk. Do you? We never ask questions, or at least most don't. It's a lot of funnels and a lot of water poured down the spout and out the bottom, and them telling us it's wine when it's not. They run us so ragged by the end of the day we can't do anything but go to bed. Clarice, everyone in this society is homogenous. No one has any unique ideas or says anything of depth. The constant pleasure and movement of people prevent them from having enough time to stand still and really pay attention. Looking a little bit more at Clarice, Clarice is like the perfect example of the she's not like other girls, manic pixie dream girl. In the sense that she mainly just serves as a character that helps Guy realize how screwed up society currently is. Being the quirky and eccentric girl that Clarice is, she asks Guy questions about the smell of cinnamon leaves or the taste of rain. And he starts to think that there might be something missing. Then, naturally, as soon as she's kind of like jolted Guy out of his stupor, she literally disappears. Like, talk about dimensionality. But anyways, Guy begins to notice the contrast between the eccentricity and the vibrance of Clarice to his wife, Mildred, who spends all day with seashells plugged into her ears and talking to their electronic walls in their house. He realizes that he no longer feels connected to Mildred, like pretty much at all, like zero, to the point where he wouldn't even cry if she died. And he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry, for it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image. Well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when you came down to it? Literally, not just one wall, but so far, 3. Through Guy's relationship with Mildred, we can see that a society that solely focuses on pleasure is also one that bars us from creating real, deep, meaningful connections. There's also something viscerally disturbing about relationships breaking down to the point where we're just numb, even to death. So Guy realizes that despite all of the things that he does for fun and pleasure, he's still deeply unhappy for some reason. I'm so damned unhappy. I'm so mad, and I don't know why I feel like I'm putting on weight. I feel fat. I feel like I've been saving up a lot of things and don't know what. So Guy starts to realize that he has no clue why he's doing the things that he's been doing in his life. He's saving up and growing fat because all of the things that he's doing in his life aren't really moving anywhere. They're kind of directionless. This is the classic existential crisis. And then he sees a woman voluntarily burning to death with her books, and this deeply unsettles Guy. You weren't there. You didn't see, he said. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing. She was as rational as you and I, more so perhaps, and we burned her. Given the society that they live in, this makes perfect sense why it would be so deeply unsettling to Guy. If the only thing that has ever mattered to you is increasing your own pleasure, then why would anyone ever voluntarily feel pain or make sacrifice? Both Clarice and this woman are really integral in making Guy take a deeper look at his life and ask himself what he's missing and is he happy. Before we talk about how to solve this existential crisis that Guy is going through, we first have to understand it. And there is no better case study than Captain Beatty himself. So who is Captain Beatty and what does he represent? I think Beatty is the classic Nietzschean nihilist. One of the most famous lines in Western literature is "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." To understand Beatty, we have to understand what Nietzsche is trying to say. So for some better context, here is a continuation of the passage. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. We are forever plunging backwards, forwards, sideways, in all directions. There is no longer any up or down left. We are straying through an endless nothingness. He was not talking about a literal God. He was talking about our perception of God and religion in general. Since the Enlightenment and the age of science, the realm of the divine has shrunk and shrunk. Religion has lost its hold on the world because now there are so many things that we can explain through science, technology, or philosophy. There's no longer a need for religion in the practical sense, but this murder doesn't come without its consequences. If you think about the existential role that religion plays in a person's life, it gives people meaning and direction. A Christian, for example, has a pretty clear purpose in life. The Bible tells him right from wrong, how to live a good life, and what the meaning of the universe is. But without it, as Nietzsche says, we are straying through an endless nothingness. The universe has lost its divine order, and our lives are no longer this inherently meaningful thing. And Nietzsche doesn't necessarily see this as a good thing. In fact, he's quite anxious about it. With the death of absolute right and wrong, there's no longer any objective foundation for any value. Everything is thrown into chaos. There's no absolute truth. Life is meaningless. Nihilism. So what are the similarities between the average nihilist and Captain Beatty? Unlike Mildred and her friends, Beatty is an extremely educated individual, and this is shown through his long dialogues with Guy. This quote is really long and would be really tiring to read, so I'm not going to read it for the sake of time and for the sake of my own convenience, but you can pause it and read it. It basically just shows how smart Beatty is and that he can also use books and intelligent arguments to prove his point. But despite all of his education, there's one thing that Beatty cannot handle: ambiguity. No matter how much he learns, he can't find the objective truth or meaning to the universe that he wants so desperately to find. He realizes that everything in philosophy clashes with itself. For every famous philosopher, there is an equally intelligent and famous philosopher calling him or her an idiot. Beatty ultimately realizes that knowledge is contradictory and it will never give you the objective and exact answers that you're looking for. There's too much weight and ambiguity in thinking. Swahili, Indian, English lit, I speak them all. A kind of excellent dumb discourse, Willie. Oh, you were scared silly, said Beatty, for I was doing a terrible thing in using the very books you clung to rebut you on every hand, on every point. What traitors books can be. You think they're backing you up and they turn on you. Others can use them too, and there you are, lost in the middle of the moor, in a great welter of nouns and verbs and adjectives. So Beatty kind of realizes that there's no real basis for anything, and so he moves towards hedonism, because if nothing matters, you may as well be happy. And they'll be happy, because facts of that sort don't change. Any man who can take up a TV wall apart and put it back together again, and most men can nowadays, is happier than any man who tries to slide rule, measure, and equate the universe, which just won't be measured or equated without making man feel bestial and lonely. I know, I've tried it. To hell with it. So bring your clubs and parties. Beatty is a man who cannot handle the weight of living in a nihilistic world, but all of his education and conflicting theories have led him there. In this way, his relationship with knowledge perfectly parallels what Nietzsche described. It's the fact that we've learned more about the world through science and philosophy and technology that we have killed God. And in that sense, knowledge is what's responsible for us realizing that life is meaningless. And the thing that makes Beatty such a good character is that on some level, his ideas are logically sound. Beatty, unlike Mildred and her friends, is not like some walking NPC or sheeple. He has genuinely thought through his ideas, and this is the conclusion he's arrived at. And I think that gives a certain level of respect to the society that is constructed in Fahrenheit 451. It would have been easy and obvious to say who would want to live in a hedonistic society if all we ever saw were characters like Mildred. But Bradbury doesn't do that. I don't think he takes lightly the real possibility that maybe it is better to live in a hedonistic society. And Beatty isn't just some random madman. In some sense, he sees himself as performing a noble duty. He's allowing the people to be happy.
We stand against the small tide of those who want to make everyone unhappy with conflicting theory and thought. Hold steady. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world.
Montag really has no way to refute Beatty's arguments logically, but the reader is shown that there is some fundamental flaw in Beatty's thinking without being explicitly told what that is, because at the end of the day, Beatty wants to die.
Beatty wanted to die. In the middle of the crying, Montag knew it for the truth. Beatty had wanted to die. He had just stood there, not really trying to save himself. Just stood there, joking, needling.
So this is just as confusing to Montag as I think it is to the reader, because here's like an extremely educated person who believes in the way that society is currently structured to promote pleasure and happiness. So why would he want to die? And what I think Bradbury is saying is that this is the ultimate end to hedonistic nihilism. If life is meaningless and all Beatty does is pursue pleasure after pleasure, that doesn't solve the problem that life is meaningless. It amplifies it. What's the point of feeling happy or pleasure if nothing I do or feel matters? Pleasure becomes a constant reminder of the emptiness of life. And so Beatty takes the opportunity to die. So this now begs the question, what is missing in this dystopian world? The answer is responsibility and meaning, the opposite of burning. The lack of responsibility in society is explicitly mentioned early on in the book.
But that was a long time ago when they had things different. They believed in responsibility, my uncle says. Do you know I'm responsible? I was spanked when I needed it, years ago. And I do all the shopping and house cleaning by hand.
This can also be understood through the metaphor of fire and burning that I brought up earlier. The very cause of Guy's existential vacuum is burning. And it's only when he realizes the value in responsibility, i.e. not burning things, that his life begins to feel better.
So if he burnt things with the firemen and the sun burnt time, that meant that everything burned. One of them had to stop burning. The sun wouldn't, certainly. So it looked as if it had to be Montag and the people he had worked with until a few short hours ago. Somewhere, the saving and the putting away had to begin again, and someone had to do the saving and the keeping.
At the end of the novel, Guy finds his meaning and responsibility in joining like the secret society of bookkeepers, and the life that he ends up leading is the answer to the existential vacuum. But it's also not that simple. If responsibility is all that we need to find meaning in life, then Beatty on some level already had responsibility. Like I established in the previous section, Beatty sees himself as someone who allows the rest of the people in society to be happy. But he also wants to die, so there obviously has to be something missing there. The difference lies in the two nuanced ways that the bookkeepers view meaning and responsibility, and this allows them to persist even in the face of ambiguity and meaninglessness. During Guy's rebellion, he sees himself almost as Beatty did, the important protector of the world. And during his rebellion, he almost has these visions of grandeur about how he's going to completely change society by himself.
Would he have time for a speech? As the hound seized him in view of 10 or 20 or 30 million people, mightn't he sum up his entire life in the last week in one single phrase or a word that would stay with them long after? What could he say in a single word, a few words that would sear all of their faces and wake them up?
At times, he sees himself in the spotlight of this change. And I think this generally aligns with how we currently view history. History is normally taught as a series of really ultra important people making world-shifting decisions. But Bradbury completely refutes this belief. Meaning is deconstructed from this highly individualistic and self-centered lens, and much more emphasis is put on meaning in the collective sense. Bookkeepers literally constantly repeat to themselves that no individual is important.
The most important single thing we had to pound into ourselves was that we were not important. We mustn't be pedants. We were not to feel superior to anyone else in the world.
This is doubly reinforced by the fact that the main character's name is Guy, not some flashy and remarkable name like Esteban Julio Ricardo Montoya de Rosa Ramirez. This can be read as Bradbury saying that this story is not about any particular individual changing the world in any particular way, but it's about how any person, any guy, can find his meaning in the world. If meaning is looked at as this hyper-individualistic thing, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with hopelessness. Much like nihilism, what is the point of helping anyone if I'm just going to die? Changing the world isn't about being in the center of the spotlight. It's about willingly giving up the spotlight because you realize it's not about you or any individual in particular. Bookkeepers find meaning and value not in producing some great and permanent change, but in realizing that there is value in just existing and having existed.
Grandfather's been dead for all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. He touched me. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, as long as you can change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away.
This ties into the collectivist approach that the bookkeepers take. Since they allow themselves to not be the center of the universe, they can find meaning in the fact that they changed someone else and that in turn, that someone else will change someone else. This shifts a lot of the weight and pressure of the meaninglessness of life off of individuals to have this all-important, meaningful life. Instead, meaning becomes an inherent quality of existing. Thus, in order to cope with the ambiguity of the universe, we have to first allow ourselves to truly believe that we are not at the center of it. The second major thing we have to change is how we fundamentally view meaning. Generally, when we think about meaning, it normally comes in the form of a very concrete goal or measurement. Life has meaning when we can get to heaven. What is the point of living if there is nothing on the other side of life? Or worse, what if we go to hell forever? We normally view our efforts as meaningless if they don't produce the results that we want them to. What is the point of writing 13 books if none of them ever get published? We generally want something not only concrete, but permanent. This is partly the reason why heaven feels so attractive. Even when we want to make creative works, we want to make creative works that outlast us, that will live longer than we do, because we want to feel some level of permanence. But this has really nihilistic implications. Like, what's the point of helping someone if they're also just going to die? Again, this problem is best characterized by Beatty. Beatty has purpose and responsibility, but Beatty's purpose is to ensure that people are happy. But that fundamentally isn't meaningful to Beatty because life isn't inherently meaningful. So the purpose he has isn't enough to make him want to live because it doesn't really matter to him. The bookkeepers approach meaning in a fundamentally different way. Clearly, on the surface, their goal is to just protect and preserve the books. But they have no clue whether or not the books that they remember are right or whether or not they will actually even help anybody. And they explicitly acknowledge that it's very possible that it might not ever end up helping anyone.
Ask no guarantees, ask for no security. There never was such an animal. Someday the load we're carrying with us may help someone. But even when we had the books on hand a long time ago, we didn't use what we got out of them. We went right on insulting the dead. We went right on spitting in the graves of all the poor ones who died before us.
They're doing this concrete action for a very ambiguous future, which defies the way that we normally view meaning. The way that they embrace this ambiguous future is by letting go of concrete measurements, and instead shifting their focus towards the preservation of hope. There's real and true hope that humans can learn from their past mistakes and make the world better. There's meaning in that.
There was a silly damn bird called the phoenix back before Christ. Every few hundred years, he built a pyre and burned himself up. He must have been first cousin to man. But every time he burnt himself up, he sprang out of the ashes. He got himself born all over again. And it looks like we're doing the same thing, over and over. But we've got one damn thing the phoenix never had. We know the damn silly thing we just did. We know all the damn silly things we've done for 1,000 years. And as long as we know that and always have it around where we can see it, someday we'll stop making the goddamn funeral pyres and jumping into the middle of them. We pick up a few more people that remember every generation. And when the war is over, someday, some year, the books can be written again. The people will be called in, one by one, to recite what they know, and we'll set it up in type until another dark age when we might have to do the whole damn thing over again. But that's the wonderful thing about man. He never gets so discouraged or disgusted that he gives up doing it all over again, because he knows very well it is important and worth the doing.
Maybe the future isn't clear and there isn't any objective meaning in it, but in that ambiguity lies hope. If the future is unclear and life is meaningless, that means that life can be whatever we make it. All that we can do is learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past and move forward. That's what makes humans special. It's what separates us from other beings. Because any society, no matter how good, is subject to collapsing. All that they do is believe in their ability to grow and learn to deal with the problems that spring up along the way. And in doing so, they manage to escape the existential vacuum. On the surface, Fahrenheit 451 is about government censorship and authoritarian regimes, but on a much deeper level, it tells a much more human story, perhaps the most important one. It's a story of struggling to find meaning in life, falling into the pitfalls of hedonism, and the meaninglessness of a life centered around pleasure. But then it shows us the answer to this existential vacuum. It tells us how we can live more fulfilled and better lives by finding meaning in our existence. Remind ourselves that we are not individually important, and shift our goals from concrete and everlasting changes to contributing to humanity's ability to grow and learn.